In this module, we will discuss different aspects of governance regarding school budgeting and how schools are financed both locally and by the state. As employees within the district, it is important to understand the law that governs how we create and inform stakeholders of budget creation and how our district receives its funding. With this knowledge, we begin to understand the importance of budgeting decisions made by the superintendent and board of trustees, as well as the need for and desire of the school to achieve higher attendance levels as it affects the funding of our school. First, let's start with budget considerations. This will be the laws and requirements at the state level that hold a school district accountable for its transparency when developing a budget. Texas Education Codes 44.002 through 44.006 are our main focus for this portion of the discussion. According to Texas Education Code, the superintendent is officially the budget officer for the school district. This is to say that the budget process begins with the district superintendent. It is his duty to prepare the budget or lead the cause for it to be prepared. TEA recommends that the budget be developed by the superintendent in conjunction with the school district's board of trustees. Texas Education Code calls for the budget to be prepared by August 20th. The board president should call a public meeting, giving 10 days public notice through public media for the proposed budget, such as the local newspaper. Any taxpayer living in the district is able to attend and participate in this meeting. A summary of the proposed budget should be posted on the school district website. If the school district does not have a website, then the proposal should be posted in the district's central administrative office. Furthermore, Texas Education Code states that funds may only be spent as intended by the approved budget. If an unexpected occasion arises, the Board of Trustees has the option to amend the budget or create an emergency supplemental budget. The adopted budget must be posted on the school district's website and must be maintained on the website for 3 years. In addition to Texas Education Code, TEA requires that the Board of Trustees has adopted a budget for the new fiscal year no later than August 31st. The minutes recorded in the board meeting will be used by TEA to record the adoption and amending of the budget. Also, it is required the budgets for the general fund, food service fund, whether included in the general fund or added as a separate fund, and debt service fund be included in the official district budget. The budget should be monitored periodically. Those responsible for different organizations and departments within the district should be responsible for monitoring that department's budget. For example, campus principals will be responsible for monitoring their campus's budget, and an athletic director would be responsible for monitoring the athletic department budget. Grant funding, while a small percentage of a school's funding, should be considered in the overall funding picture due to its uniqueness and special requirements. It is also necessary to ensure that only authorized users have access to the district accounting system, as unauthorized personnel could jeopardize the school's funds. Now, let's discuss how our district receives its funding. Funding for public schools comes from local property taxes, state funds, and federal funds. The majority of funding comes from local property taxes, however. Today we will discuss local and state funding. The Foundation School Program, or FSP, a division of TEA, is the state program that determines how much funding schools will receive. The FSP provides the state of Texas' share of funding to school districts. It provides schools with assistance in financing, maintenance, and operations. There are two tiers of funding that we will discuss. The first one being Tier 1. We will discuss Tier 2 in a few minutes. Tier 1 is made up of different allotments in which average daily attendance, or ADA, along with the district compressed tax rate, or CTR, are used to determine Tier 1 entitlement. The basic allotment is the basis of funding most Tier 1 allotments, and it varies among districts. In this graphic, average daily attendance is explained. This is the average number of students who are in attendance daily for the entire school year. Most effectively, it is determined by calculating the number of days attended by all students in each 6 weeks period. This number for each period is then divided by the number of instructional days for that 6 weeks. All six weeks figures are then added up and divided by 6 to get what is known as the refined ADA. This list are the allotments considered for Tier 1 entitlement. While we will not discuss all of these allotments, I will explain those that would most likely affect Klondike ISD. From this graphic, you can easily see that regular program allotment makes up the majority of Tier 1 entitlement. Statewide regular program represents about 3/4 of all Tier 1 entitlement. Additionally, special education, compensatory, and career and technical represent the largest portions of the remaining quarter of entitlement. Regular program allotment, again, is where the majority of all districts' Tier 1 entitlement comes from. This is calculated by taking the school's ADA multiplied by the number of students not enrolled in special education or career and technical education, then multiplied by what is known as the Regular Program Adjustment Factor, or RPAF. Currently, RPAF is set at 0.98. This reduces the school district's regular program allotment. However, this rate is set to expire at the end of the current school year, at which time it will be reconsidered. The Special Education Allotments, or SE, allows for different weights based on the special education program that different students within the district are enrolled in. Homebound students carry the largest weight for this allotment, but it is notable that even special education students who are mainstreamed also receive a weight of 1.1, meaning this student would add more weight to the district's overall allotment than a student considered in regular program. Another allotment of interest is that in response to the program education grant. This grant allows a student to leave his current school for another school within the district or for another district entirely if the current school at which the student is enrolled has failed state testing for 2 out of the last 3 years, or if the school has been considered to be academically unacceptable at any time within the past 3 years. The school that receives these transfer students are allotted funds as part of its Tier 1 entitlement. The transportation allotment is of particular interest to Klondike ISD given the location of our school. Given our rural location, 15 miles from the nearest city, there are very few students who live nearby the school. The transportation allotment allows for schools to receive funding if they provide transportation to students living within the district who live 2 miles or further from their campus. Furthermore, there's funding available, though limited, for students who live within 2 miles of their school of attendance if they live in an area where the school board has determined transportation to be hazardous. Also, all districts are eligible for the high school allotment. With this allotment, schools receive $275 for every student in ADA who are enrolled in grades 9 through 12. So how does the state calculate local and state shares of Tier 1 entitlement? The Local Fund Assignment, or LFA, is what each district provides for itself. This is determined through tax collections generated by assessing the lower of two values: the district's compressed tax rate, or $1, if the CTR is higher. To determine the state share of Tier 1, the LFA is subtracted from the total Tier 1 entitlement of the district, and the remaining balance is paid from state funds. If LFA is greater than the calculated Tier 1 entitlement, the district is said to be budget balanced. Regardless, a budget balanced school is still constitutionally entitled to its available school fund, which we will discuss later. Tier 2 entitlement provides a guaranteed yield or level of payment intended to supplement a district's basic funding of Tier 1. Whereas Tier 1 pays the lower of the district's compressed tax rate, or $1, Tier 2 is each cent of tax effort beyond the tax effort required to meet the local fund assignment per student in weighted average daily attendance, which is different from the ADA used to calculate Tier 1 entitlement. Tier 1 minus a few allotments provides a district's WADA. There are currently two levels of funding for Tier 2. Level 1 funding is determined by the first 6 pennies, which are referred to as the golden pennies, above the district's compressed tax rate. These pennies are multiplied by the district's WADA and an amount set by the General Appropriations Act. As of the 2012-2013 school year, this amount was $59.97. Level 1 funding provides the highest level of enrichment funding for school districts. Level 2 funding is every additional penny after the first 6 pennies. These pennies are referred to as copper pennies and provide a lower level of enrichment funding. The copper pennies are also multiplied by the district's WADA and a fixed rate of $31.95. This graphic is an example of how a school district's Tier 2 allotment is calculated. By taking example ISD's L1 and L2 funding and adding them together, they are able to determine that a school district's Tier 2 allotment is $1,253,664. The vast majority of this allotment came from the golden pennies provided in L1 funding, and L2, with only 1 penny available, provided a significantly lower enrichment. Recapture. This is likely what any property-wealthy school never wants to hear, but thanks to Chapter 41, any one school is prevented from having a wealth greater than the rate of $59.97 determined by the General Appropriations Act. Any school whose local assignment is above $59.97, those property-wealthy schools, becomes subject to recapture. This chart shows Level 1 funding of Tier 2 entitlement and how recapture comes into play. In this example, you have a property-poor school district which is only able to generate $28 of the $59.97 that all schools are entitled to at Level 1. The moderately property-wealthy district, represented by the middle bar, is able to produce $40 of its Level 1. And the property-wealthy school district, represented by the bar on the right, produces over its $59.97 allotment and is therefore subject to recapture. For each of the two districts that were below the $59.97 rate, the remainder is paid by the state. So what happens to the $10 recaptured from the property-wealthy district? Schools in recapture have 5 options. The first option is to consolidate with another school district. The second is to detach property from the district. Option 3 is to purchase attendance credits from the state. Option 4 is to enter into a contract to educate non-resident students from another district. And option 5 is to consolidate tax bases with another district. Option 3 and 4 are by far the most frequently chosen. By choosing option 3, a school reduces its wealth by sending money to the state. This money is used by the state to make the FSP payments that property-poor and moderately property-wealthy districts are unable to make as part of its Tier 2 entitlement. By choosing option 4, a school district bypasses giving its money to the state and instead gives its money to one or more property-poor districts. Upon receipt of these funds, the state's FSP payments are reduced to this district. Now we will discuss other state aid available for districts. When it comes to aid for funding facilities, school districts may receive aid in one of 2 ways. First, a school may receive funding for debt service payments with the purchase, construction, renovation, and expansion of instructional facilities. This is the Instructional Facilities Allotment, or IFA. This allotment would be for any new additions or renovations. The existing debt allotment would be for schools with a previous addition through bonds. This allotment provides for funding for debt service payments on eligible bonded debt. I mentioned the available school fund earlier. Remember that schools whose local fund assignment is greater than Tier 1 entitlement are still entitled their ASF. ASF is funding made for each eligible student enrolled in the district and based off of the previous year's ADA. This is part of a district's FSP state aid and not in addition to it. meaning that this would be applied to a school whose LFA is below Tier 1 entitlement as part of its FSP. However, it is constitutionally guaranteed, hence the reason a property wealthy school district is still eligible to receive it. Also, there is the staff allotment. Again, all districts, including property wealthy districts, are eligible for this funding known as additional state aid for salary increases. With this allotment, districts will receive $500 for full-time, non-administrative employees, including nurses, full-time librarians, and counselors, and will receive $250 for each part-time, non-administrative employee. The Instructional Material Allotment, or IMA, replaced the Technology Allotment in 2011. The Technology Allotment was put in place to provide funding for schools to purchase e-readers and other electronic instructional materials. However, it was changed to the IMA, which provides funding that districts can use to purchase paper or electronic instructional materials and related technological equipment. The funding can also be used to access technological equipment, provide educator training, and pay the salaries of certain technical support staff. This last portion we will discuss is Texas House Bill 1. Many of you may likely be familiar with House Bill 1 and the changes it made to school funding, though you may not know it. House Bill 1, which went into effect on September 1, 2007, reduced all local district property taxes from $1.50 to $1 per $100,000 property valuation. The state's plan was to make up the difference by implementing a new business franchise tax. However, it ended up creating a $4 billion shortfall. It did allow school districts to be able to use their golden pennies without being subject to recapture, and the funding level was promised not to fall below the level of funding in 2006. There were three ways schools could raise additional revenue for their district: through enrollment increase, the use of golden pennies, or a public vote to increase the local tax rate. When the deficit occurred, the state used surplus to make up the difference. When this ran out, the federal stimulus was applied. Then when that ran out, there were no more options, as all funding had been allocated elsewhere. As enrollment increases across the state, the deficit continues to rise. This led to the $5.2 billion shortfall that in turn led to the budget cuts during the 2011-2012 school year. As a result of the shortfall, there was a 5.2% cut statewide. Many districts were thus expected to make additional cuts. Those with the largest target revenue were the ones most likely to make cuts. Still, these schools are expected to continue to make cuts through 2017, and the possibility of additional statewide cuts still exists. So what is the problem here? The state of Texas is required by law to provide adequate funding to all school districts. However, it may be argued that the funding cuts recently made by the state were misaligned with the state's decision to also increase educational standards at the same time. Also, the state is required to provide adequate local discretion to school districts. So districts must be able to have a means of funding local enrichment efforts. While it is not expected for each and every teacher to know school financing and budgeting inside and out, it is beneficial for all school employees to have an understanding of how schools are funded and the legislation that regulates school funding and budgeting decisions. I hope that this has been an enlightening experience for you all. Thank you very much.